during spring 2012. And the actors interviewed may be described as professionals, women rights activists and feminists among the middle classes living in Cairo and Alexandria. I would like to say something quickly about the theoretical perspective. Because what we would like to do is to combine theories of agency with translation and movement. And when I talk about agency, I talk it in terms of, in agreement with Mahmoud, I mean that agency does not only mean resistance. We need to problematize the universality of the desire to be free from relations of subordination. Not only in relation to the grand patriarchal plan, but in relation to state and global politics. The meaning of agency cannot be fixed in advance, but must be explored in relation to particular historical and cultural situations. Then the other tool we use is translation. And the significance of cultural meanings and the value of cultural diversity in relation to other dynamics of global power structures must always be recognized. Following Salinari, global concepts such as human rights must always be translated into local contexts at the level of local implementation. The last tool, movement. In line with Laila Abologud, we argue that human rights perspective must be tracked into various locals in order to understand how women's and men's rights are exceedingly differently in play, paying particular attention to mediations and transformations. An elaboration of human rights as a social fact includes an analysis of the way both practices and talk of rights organize social and political fields, producing organizations, projects, and forms of governing as much as being produced by them. So this was our theoretical tools. I would like to continue to say something about feminism. There are a wide range of feminist definitions and orientations, and feminism can mean dissimilar things and does not have the same connotations for different people. A common feature among various feminists is that the term denotes both consciousness and the social movement. It is based on awareness that women suffer discrimination because of the gender. Awareness of injustice, however, is not sufficient. The other aspect of feminism is found in actual attempts to change these inequalities and remove constraints placed upon women in favor of a more equitable gender system. For the interviewees, the term feminist was generally viewed as controversial, and the majority did not consider it as a proper concept. Some of the responses Hellstam received when asking how they conceptualized feminism and how they related to the term were, I will just say some quotes here. One is, I quote, "Feminism in Egypt is totally different from the real feminism anywhere else. It is more about women activism." End quote. Another one, I quote, "I never use it because, you know, I'm Egyptian, I know my society." End of quote. I will now continue to talk about the dilemmas of feminism in relation to the global community. Religion in general, and Islam in particular, has often in the West, in a liberal feminist theory, been accused as responsible for the inferior position of women in societies and communities with a majority of populations with a Muslim faith, not least in today's Egypt under President Morsi's rule. Our argument is, in line with Mahmoud and others, that to dismiss religious women who incorporate and inhabit values traditionally perceived as patriarchal, as going against their own interest, is outdated, and repeats historical patterns of superiority as well as reverts to universalist feminist rhetoric. As Sabu Mahmoud argues, a feminist agenda must be derived from the women it is targeting. None of the Egyptian women interviewed regarded Islam or Christianity per se as contrary to feminist interests and demands in Egypt. This was a point that was particularly emphasized. Frederika expressed, I quote, "If you talk to Western feminists, they obsess over religion and Islam in particular. But these are not the issues, and they are not the pressure points of change. It is not about religion, it is about society." End of quote. Frida hereby questions the relevance of religion as an issue for feminist demands in Egypt. Instead, it is suggested by her and others that the real issues are to be found in general societal concerns. But at the same time, as Abdulrahman indicates in a study based on more than 50 Egyptian NGOs, feminist activists consciously translate the priorities to tailor the objectives to suit priorities of these agencies. Another thing that was brought up was the need or the importance of using local terminology. Michal and Sohila pointed out, we do not say the concepts are from the UN. We need to say, it is right, it is religious. I cannot use that as a concept when I talk to normal women. I speak in Islamic terms. The problem is not in Islam, but the theories and the stories provided by Islamists and Saudi Arabia. Another one, Sohila said, I will not use a controversial discourse. I would try bit by bit. You get stuck. I would try to transmit the very same ideas, but in a lighter wording. End quote. It should be noted here that was perceived as the real Islam was expressed as an equivalent to universal human rights. This means that human rights, that is to say, their values and ideals, should be advocated in a terminology accepted by the society. And furthermore, that the foundation of such ideals was to be found in religious sources themselves, which is aligned with Mary's theoretical force of the necessity of translating human rights. Okay, I will talk about other aspects than religion. Because according to interviewees, any political struggle taking place in Egypt today must relate to concrete economic and political conditions. One woman said, I quote, I do not think ordinary women lack interest, passion or concern. It is a question of, do I go and sell my vegetables today so I can feed my kids, so they can go to school, so I can buy them water to drink, or do I go to Tahrir Square to discuss politics? Beside the fulfillment of basic needs, as the majority of the women and men highlighted, they also expressed that even if the relevance of reforms of law were considered as important in relation to feminism and human rights in the new Egypt, it was not enough. It does not necessarily mean that reforms of legislation were dismissed as irrelevant, but as unsatisfactory as a method to advance women's status and situation in the new Egypt. The main problem, according was as the women and men phrased it in their terms, culture. Things will not happen, said Sohila, by legislation or constitution. You just need to overcome the culture. Like, for example, as long as someone in the street is saying a brave girl is worth 100 men, then we still have a problem, no matter what our constitutions say, or no matter what the law says. Although older women and men discuss culture as a hindrance to advance women's status, or rather certain aspects of culture that work against women's interest. A few of the interviewees explicitly mentioned patriarchy or patriarchal culture. Other women framed it rather as hierarchy than structural male dominance. The hierarchical environment perceived as patriarchal culture in Egyptian society may not be seen as an obstacle to rights and freedom, and certainly does not exhaust the possibility of women's agency. There are subtle ways in which women may submit to, but also dominant in patriarchal structures. Karim gave an example of Egyptian women's agency, regardless of class, age, or other categories. He said, "Women learn that women need to take their rights, but not by equality, but by manipulating. They have been raised in that way. You get your rights by controlling your man." In my previous research among women from totally different social stratum, women living in lower income neighborhoods in Cairo, manipulation as agency was something that was continuously brought up. Many women talk about various strategies. Ahmed told me that she was taught by her aunt how to treat a man in order to get what you want in life. She said, "I observed her and I learned everything from her." She recalled that her aunt had used a very soft voice when speaking with her husband, and that she had looked into her husband's eyes with a special gaze. She was soft, smooth, and coquettish. Her husband melted, Ahmed remembered, since he could not resist her, and he gave her everything she wanted in life. If we, in line with Mahmoud, detach agency from the goals of progressive politics, it is here possible to perceive, in Karim's term, manipulation as agency. However, we prefer to use the concept navigation rather than manipulation. By using the body as a meaning for the step has also political consequences, because the body has the ability to act and to tell a larger story at the same time as it also signifies contradictions, since it is capable to both reaffirm and transform forms of domination. In sum of this section, through agency, navigation here, as a mediating category, it is possible to examine the interconnections between identity formation and social structures. Egyptian feminists are navigating and parrying between different desires of actors on different levels. I will now continue to talk about dilemmas of feminism and the public. The 2011 uprising made it necessary for Egyptian feminist activists and organizations to reconsider their strategies and to adapt to new political situation. Oh. Then I have to go to my conclusion. I'm so sorry about that. I don't know if you can follow me now. In my conclusion, I say, in the political discourse of liberating women, it is easy to invoke and pursue a specific agenda as relevant for all women. In order to avoid playing in the hands of such politics, and above all, to accurately and respectfully work for women's genuine interest, we need to contextualize in depth what feminist politics means according to various circumstances, intentions, and desires. There is a need to recognize the autonomous life of those women who, from the outside, may perceive as stuck within patriarchal norms. Mahmoud rightfully urges us to ask ourselves, as academics, as feminists, as policymakers, do we really understand the lives of the women we so passionately want to remake? And ultimately, we may need to consider our own imaginations of what constitutes feminism and a good life. So in this paper, I should have been shown examples more about Egyptian feminists and their intentions to translate universal concepts on the local level, as well as put forward processes of circulation, mediation, and transformation. The Egyptian feminists are navigating between the global donor community, ordinary people, and the new government in different ways. They are using different strategies at the same time as they are being produced by the same forces. As Mary highlights, it is not possible to judge who is an internal and who is an external actor. These boundaries are too shifting to be conclusive, which brings us back to the very aim of this paper. How feminism and agency are formulated in Egyptian transition in relation to how it was, the present, and the imagined future. Throughout this paper, translation, mediation, and movement are crucial analytical tools. Only then we can begin to ask critical questions relevant to both academia and the policy world in relation to the new Egypt. This is my last sentence. As Abeloubi points out, we need to ask how human rights and other universal concepts such as feminism makes and remakes the world. Thank you.
We're going to entertain questions at the end. However, since we're going to go on a transition with the PowerPoint presentation, we can entertain one question so we can save time and use the time wisely while we connect to the computer. One question for the presenter, if someone has it, while we deal with. If you need time to think, you can take it. But I just wanted to use the time wisely.
It's a lot. Okay.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now we go with.
Yes.
Is this your presentation?
Yes.
Excellent. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our next presenter, Alessandra Gonzalez from John Jay College in New York City, part of the CUNY system. Her paper is Working with Patriarchy, Strategies for Women's Empowerment in Comparative Perspective, and I know that Alessandra has copies of her book downstairs and they are for sale in case you're interested.
Great.
And I'll give you the full 2
Perfect.
minutes.
Thank you, Guillermo. Thanks to everyone also for coming and taking the time to show some interest in this topic. And as Guillermo was so kind to point out, my first book was on my field work that I did regarding the subject of Islamic feminism in the Gulf. And I based most of my interviews in Kuwait. So I learned a lot from that experience because, as Maria was pointing out, it's important to contextualize our discussion about women's rights and what different women mean when they're looking to have a voice in the public. So I think that that's very important. But I wanted to just present a new paper that I'm working on, and I'd be very interested in your feedback because on my travels, my background's in Latin America, and I can't tell you how many times people would say, well, there's so many commonalities between Latin culture and Arab culture, and they would use anecdotal stories to show that maybe, we can bridge this east-west divide because we actually have many cultural points in common. So it got me thinking, well, can we actually test this or in some way analyze maybe what kind of commonalities we have when it comes to women in politics, women's leadership, and what kinds of challenges that they face, and if there are indeed things that women share in common, and if they can share from their experiences with each other. That's what got me thinking about looking at women's rise into politics in Latin America, and also basically using the example from my field work in Kuwait and Qatar. Come in, please. Yes, as a framework to help us see maybe some commonalities where we can begin to mesh women's rights dialogue across East and West, and making broader parallels with the challenges we face instead of just focusing on So maybe a comparative strategy would help us broaden this discussion. So initially, my research questions for this paper were how women's activists set goals and approach the issue of women's rights differently by countries, even within a separate region. Again, these were the questions I approached this paper, very much still in process. How does the term feminism apply to an indigenous women's movement, and is that appropriate for all of these movements that emerge? As Maria pointed out, many of her interviewees and most of mine wouldn't call themselves feminists because of all the political baggage that comes with from a Western context. So is that term still relevant to our discussion when we're making macro level comparisons? What are lessons learned from Islamic feminist movements about the principles of women's empowerment from within traditional Muslim societies and cultures, and how do those compare with the Latin American experience? And then, of course, the goals of this kind of research. What are the practical points of cooperation and exchange between women leaders in Latin America and the Gulf, including cultural, educational, and perhaps business partnerships? And also assessing the influence that local governments, international agencies, NGOs also have in this discussion, because of course we know that activists never work in a vacuum. So it's not enough to say, well, these are what women in Brazil have been fighting for, and just be completely irrespective of the fact that economics is very much plays a role in terms of things going on. Obviously the political dynamics is it popular to be anti-Western, anti-American right now, and are people going to play into that, and how does that affect women's rise into politics? And something I found very important as a gender scholar is addressing the role that men play in facilitating women's rights, both in Latin America and the Arab Gulf. So I approached these research questions, first kind of just taking a broad view of historical, biographical information, and a review of the academic literature of media portrayals of women leaders. So when I began, I just, again, had situated a lot of my fieldwork in the Gulf. And so what I began to see is there are plenty of historical examples of where women have been leaders in the Arabian Peninsula, but they haven't always been highlighted because of various, gatekeepers in terms of knowledge about Islam. And so it's now become more the case that women's historical contributions to the development of the societies in the Arabian Peninsula are coming to light. Some such historical examples highlight the political contributions that, for example, one of these scholars that I read recently highlights the strong women of Islam at its very beginning, namely the Prophet's wives, but also incites them as warriors who even took up arms in the early Islamic wars, and how women who had access to political power, whether they were relatives of leaders or somehow involved in their circles of influence, how they actually were educated, literate, and politically influential. They contributed financially and philanthropically to important religious and political movements in the peninsula. Interestingly, little known are even leaders who portray themselves as very strong religious and political leaders, such as Sheikh Mohammed ibn Abdul Wahhab, actually recognized and publicly appreciated the influence and support that women played in his movement's political victory. So again, these are scholars that I've been looking at from within the Gulf who are trying to rediscover women's roles in their current state. Some other scholars, highlight women of just long ago, but then moving into today, we also see more recent examples. Some that Maria mentioned, that Sabal Mahmoud and others, Abu Luhad, have been emphasizing out of Egypt. I took, again, just a starting point and saying, let's start with the Gulf, for example. So I looked and I found some of this data. I found a great list from the Guide to Women Leaders, which is open source and available to all of you. It's guidetowomenleaders.com. So I went to female ministers by country, and I just focus on the Gulf. So it's you can tell these especially in the late 90s and 2000s, I looked in some macro level variables that also give us context to the situation. So talking about each country, its year of independence, the year of women's suffrage, year of leadership, and then just naming actual women who have served in political positions, what kind of titles, and also kind of trying to make the point that religion is a factor and conditions women's rise to politics. So this by country differs very much. So where women, gained suffrage later but had access to education earlier, these are all factors that need to be considered and looked at. Now, most of these women who are leaders, as you might begin to recognize quickly, again, have access to political power most of the time because of their social location. So either their connections, by family, by social class. These are all very important to distinguish. And I, though I'm a sociologist by training, we love going directly to the people and getting averages. I've emphasized the elites in my research because many times it's people at the top who have the power to make quick changes. So I don't have a problem looking at elites, and it's amazing to see what happens when women are given access and open doors in the elite to actually make changes. A lot of the positions that you see women occupying in leadership revolve ministries of education, which obviously are very important. They determine, to a large extent, women's access to education in general. Ministries of health, housing and development, and even broader issues like trade and industry. These are all spaces where women are beginning to occupy larger roles. Okay, so again, you can see a lot of this data is publicly available. Now, what I also wanted to emphasize is what in particular are some lessons and strategies and goals that women from my own fieldwork in Kuwait have been looking at specifically. So some of the topics that kept emerging as the most important issues to fight for women's rights include reform of status laws. Among the women, the most important topic was economic independence. That was clear. Why? Because, why not access to, health care being number one? What about personal security? Economic independence seems to be the gate that a lot of women are looking for because it gives them freedom to negotiate space in the house in terms of setting the agenda from within their own circle of influence. And then, of course, when you have access to your own money, if you have a job, you're actually interacting and making a space for yourself in the wider society. So economic independence was number one for the women. I interviewed changing personal status laws. So again, that differs by country, but ability to pass on citizenship to their children, maybe just a little bit of clarification of their rights in terms of divorce. So these are concrete, issues that maybe activists have different opinions about exactly how the details work out, but in general, that was a topic. Political participation, improving women's entrance into politics, giving them the kind of civic education that they need. Health, economic independence, personal security, and you can see there from the different colors how men prioritize women's issues. Now, just briefly, I haven't been able to do any original fieldwork in Latin America, so I, again, went through the same procedure as with the macro level women there, and I actually took data from the same website, but I made it a little bit more narrow because the access that women have had to politics extends a little, it's different, than the kind of access to political education, year of suffrage. And so on these macro levels, they're very hard, to exactly equate. And yet, we can still make comparisons. Why? Because you see, in terms of religiosity, that women are still contending with cultures that are largely by far practicing conservative Catholics, whatever their version of Catholicism, it's very important to address that in terms of activism. Again, not maybe surprisingly, but a lot of the women, we'll use Argentina as an example, a number of women had men enabling them into these political positions of power. So we have actual widows of current presidents in Argentina coming into power. You know, they obviously had a little advantage in terms of that. Even an example of a very, strong, assertive woman in the former president of Brazil here, Dilma Rousseff. She was very much seen as a protege of the previous male president. And so you have men enabling women in politics, maybe not exactly by tribal affiliation, but you still see this pattern where men are also important in terms of allowing women access to top political positions. So, just briefly, making some kind of roadmap, if you will, to where to go and continue this research. So clearly, I'm establishing some theoretical links between women activists in politics in Latin America and the Gulf, and just emphasizing the role that religion, cultural conservatism has on women's empowerment, and suggesting that incorporating religious and cultural sensibilities taps into a holistic approach to women's empowerment that is indigenous and holistic. In my experience in the Gulf, what I found that a lot of women activists were saying is they were trying to provide their own version of feminism, because what they saw is in the Western version, a secular interest took hold. They didn't see women always achieving really a happiness that they sought, and so what that they were saying is a holistic approach to women's rights, giving recognition to women who choose to stay at home as equally a valuable contribution as one who wants to run for president. Just recognizing women's diversity and choice was something that I found that perhaps could be a point of discussion from both East and West perspectives. In addition, I found that a lot of I'm asking these questions for further exploration. What revisions of Western feminism does Islamic feminism offer, and what are the strengths and weaknesses of each? Maybe a feminism that emerged from rebutting Catholic conservatism, largely in a secular milieu for the Latin American feminists, reincorporating maybe marginalized voices in Latin American politics. And what are things that experiences of women in politics in Latin America could incorporate and share with women in the Gulf? And just a question for all of you, what kinds of empirical studies would be helpful to this cooperation across regions? And of course, just a last plug for my book there, that's available downstairs, so come and see me after for that. Thank you very much.
Aylin Unver here. Oh, thank you. Do you need so where is that? Our next presenter is Aylin Unver Noi from Gedik University. The title of her presentation is Women's Rights in the Post-Arab Spring Era. Thank you, Aylin. And I guess this chair is not very... Is there chairs? Because we have one here.
My presentation is about women's rights projects of the European Union-led initiative Euro-Mediterranean Partnership and the United States-led initiative Broader Middle East and North Africa Initiative, and the current and the possible effects of the post-Arab Spring developments on these initiatives, and Turkey's role as an actor of the both initiatives on this issue. I would like to start with the women's problems in the Middle East and North Africa region. Women of this region suffer from discrimination in political, economic, and social life. Women's participation in economic life remains low in the region. Female illiteracy is considerably high in the countries of the MENA, because 2/3 of the illiterate, 65 million illiterate Arabs are women. And this is much more problem in rural areas of the Middle East and North Africa. And the women of this region are also subject to sexual harassment, domestic violence, post-abuse, honor crimes, honor killings, and gender-related health risks such as female genital mutilation. And the laws on family and personal study also discriminate against women. Although the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women was ratified by some Middle East and North African countries, reservations which based on non-compliance with the Sharia, Islamic law, remains on some issues, particularly related to personal and family study of women. The issue of equal rights and responsibilities in marriages, on all matters related to mother and her children, including guardianship, custody, trusteeship, adoption, right to choose family and family name, and further to citizenship. And I can extend this problems of the women of the region. The European Union and the United States, through their initiatives, Euro-Mediterranean Partnership and the broader Middle East and North Africa Initiative, developed several programs and projects with the local authorities, governments, and the NGOs of the region to promote women's rights and further the role and study of the woman in the countries of the Middle East and North Africa. Girl-friendly schools in Egypt is the HAR project in Jordan, Argon Our project in Morocco, the project for eradication of female genital mutilation in Egypt, gender equality in employment and small enterprises in Egypt and Jordan, creating new opportunities and networking facilities for marginalized home-based working women in Morocco and Turkey, enhancing capacities of women micro-entrepreneurs in Morocco, Egypt, Lebanon, and Tunisia, Hamar Women Empowerment and Literacy Program in Yemen, and achieving behavioral change towards women's rights among youth enrolled in community colleges in Amman, Zerk, and Jerish are some of these projects. Role of Women in Economic Life project of the European Union aimed to enhance the involvement of NGOs and the government institutions to expand economic opportunities for women. The project supported microcredit and projects from which 5,000 women benefited. Strengthening efforts to reduce illiteracy and increasing access to education, particularly for women, were determined as one of the major aims of both projects, broader Middle East and North Africa Initiative and Euro-Mediterranean Partnership. Girl-friendly schools in Egypt was initiated with the aim to tackle female illiteracy. As a part of this project, 520 girl-friendly schools were established through the European Union funds. ISDAR project, which is Poverty Alleviation Project in Jordan, aimed at empowering women and men to acquire the skills needed to enter the labor market. The extra income generated by these ISDAR graduates constitute important contributions to their family's monthly budget. The project for eradication of female genital mutilation in Egypt, which was launched by the European Union, aimed to address the mistaken perception that justify the practice through dialogue. It targeted not only girls and women, but also men of all ages, teachers, community and religious leaders, and media. The FGM Free Village Model project started in 2003 in 60 villages in Egypt. Many community leaders have signed public declarations calling for the abolition of FGM. After 2 young village girls died of FGM-related injuries, a law was passed criminalizing FGM in Egypt in 2007. Despite the mentioned several projects and programs which were initiated either by the European Union or the United States or by the governments of this region itself, countries of itself, gender equality is not at the level it should be in the MENA. The Arab Spring and victories of Islamists in the MENA brought the women's rights issue back to the agenda. All the women and men were together in these revolts for bringing democracy to their countries. The Salafis called to bring back female genital mutilation and decriminalization of FGM in Egypt after years of attempts and efforts to pass law criminalizing FGM and to promote no to FGM in Egypt. The Salafis also demand lowering the marriage age for girls, 9 to 9 or 10. In Egypt also, liberal politicians and Christian delegates withdraw from the Islamist-dominated assembly that was drafting the constitution with the claim that they were not given opportunity to discuss articles and suggestions on the role of Islam in civic freedoms and women's rights. An Islamist-dominated assembly in Egypt drafted a new constitution have agreed to remove the article that mandates equality between men and women. All these new developments, which have changed and still have potential to change the laws, might have negative impact on the sustainability of projects and programs related to women's rights initiated by the European Union and the United States. For instance, bringing back the FGM in Egypt harms what has been achieved through the project for eradication of female genital mutilation in Egypt. And the lowering the marriage age for girls to 9 or 10 leads to questioning sustainability of projects related to eradication of female illiteracy and promoting women's participation in economic life. Despite the initiatives of newly elected governments of the Middle East and North Africa region, which has potential to bring the women's rights issue a step backward, some of the European Union and the US-led projects within the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership and broader Middle East and North Africa Initiative framework are still continuing. For instance, Hamer Women Empowerment and Literacy Program in Yemen, which commenced in 2007, is an ongoing project. Besides this, some new projects for the post-Arab Spring era were initiated by the European Union and the United States. The project titled Challenges Facing Egyptian Women in Transition is one of these projects initiated for contributing to improve the women's situation in Egypt by advocating better laws and legislations, in addition to enhance the quality and the quantity of women political participation. Since 2011 and 2012, several new projects were initiated in the Middle East and North Africa region. Front of Women for defending women's human rights in Egypt, political empowerment for Yemeni educated women, Female Students for Change, the electoral and political empowerment of female university students, investigating reasons for women exclusion in Yemen, enhancing illiterate Yemeni women understanding of the concepts of gender and their rights, combating forced and early marriages of young Yemeni girls are among these projects. When we come to Turkey's role on the women's rights issue in the Middle East and North Africa region, I can say that Turkey is a member of both initiatives, actively took role, and hosted several conferences related to women's rights. A ministerial conference on strengthening the role of women in society at Euro-Mediterranean level was held to make possible equal participation of women and men in all spheres of life, which is essential elements of democracy. Turkey is one of the lead democracy assistance dialogue countries of the broader Middle East and North Africa initiative, focused on advancing dialogue and reform in the areas of women's empowerment. The participation of women in public life theme was implemented by the government of Turkey and the Turkish Economic Social Studies Foundation. And a symposium entitled Empowering Women in Public Life and Democratic Development in the MENA region was organized again by TESA to discuss women's civil, political, and socioeconomic rights. Another symposium on gender equality and political participation was organized by TESA in consultation with Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs under the framework Democracy Assistance Dialogue. Participants of this conference requested both governments and civil society consider and support the establishment of a region-wide gender institute charged with enhancing civil society and government dialogue in order to improve the women's status in the region through effective and impartial data collection, gender budgeting, and other projects. In this context, the proposed Gender Institute might facilitate and support the review of the implementation of CEDAW in the countries of the region. All these initiatives emphasize the need to utilize the potential presented by the Articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and set out to their effective implementation in the region. They also noted that Islam encourages participation of women in public life is not against the empowerment of women. In this connection, incorporation of gender equality into 10-year plan of the organization of the Islamic Conference was welcomed by the participants. The participants also welcomed the willingness of the government of Turkey and TESA to consolidate this process of consultation for empowering women in public life through facilitating and deepening the dialogue within this region. Turkey as an EU candidate country, European Union candidate country, introduced reforms in the area of women's rights. It changed its penal code, civil code, labor code, and family law. In 2004, Article 10 of the Constitution was amended, and accordingly, the state was made responsible for ensuring that men and women are treated equally. In 2005, new penal code against honor killings and violence against women was enacted. Thus, the old code, which is reduced imprisonment, was amended as lifelong imprisonment without reduction in sentence. Despite the progress achieved on women's rights, violence against women, honor killings, women illiteracy, low level participation of women in economic and political life are still among the problems that women in Turkey still face with. Turkey in the post-Arab Spring era is mostly perceived as a model for countries of the region in economic and political respects, and sometimes this has been voiced by the leader of the countries. Turkey's economic growth as the world's one of the growing major economy, and its success in combining Islam and democracy make it a force of attraction for the other countries of the region. Its soft power has also helped to play a constructive role. Some cultural factors have contributed to making Turkey a force of attraction, such as Turkish soap operas, displaying parts of Turkish way of life in a very attractive way. These television serials have increased tourist flow from the Arab world to Turkey and led to a greater cultural interaction between the Arabs and Turks. And these soap operas have been started to be broadcasting in 2006 with the Saudi-owned Arabic language satellite NBC. And the first TV serial was about a woman, a young woman named Yunus, and it was renamed as Nur and dubbed into Arabic. And its final episode was watched by 50 million women, that represents more than half of the adult women in the Arab world over the age of 15, according to the NBC. The lead male character of this TV serial supported his wife's business career and treated her as an equal. In Saudi Arabia, conservative Islamic clerics declared that these TV serials, a secular Turkish assault on Saudi society, they issued fatwas against watching them. However, Turkish soap operas showing Turkey as a modern, Muslim and prosperous become more popular than the American TV serials, and they great impact on women of the region. Actually, Turkey itself is a very complicated country with respect to women's rights. It's a country where the civil code abolished polygamy, introduced equal rights in divorce, custody, inheritance as early as 1926. But at the same time, it's one of the countries in which honor killings occurs and violence against women exists. On the way of European Union membership, important steps were taken to improve women's rights in Turkey. As you know, that women's rights is a part of human rights, and the arrest of journalists, human rights lawyers, academics, businessmen in Turkey shows us two contradictory Turkey actually. One is prosperous modern nation, that's an economic and democratic model which combines Islam and democracy successfully for the Middle East and North African countries, and whereas the other one is popular but increasingly repressive government that appears intolerant of Islam. And Turkey's human rights problem seems that might hinder it to play this role. Despite the potential of negative impacts of new laws enacted by the new elected governments of the Middle East and North Africa region on the women's rights issue, some of the European Union and US-led projects with the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership and Global Middle East and North Africa initiatives are still continuing, but their sustainability and effectiveness are remain to be seen in the medium and long term. And the future of these projects and programs is much more complicated owing to the Islamist stance towards women's rights issues and their approach to the West and the projects sponsored by the West. In this picture, Turkey is a Muslim country governed by the government which has Islamic roots and good relations with the countries of the MENA. Have an impact, might have more chance than the European Union and the United States to have an impact on this issue. Its soft power also had this cultural infiltration in the region. However, we should not ignore the reality that there can be no one-size-which-fits-all model which can be valid for every reform campaign, because every country in the region has its own particular conditions and dynamics. But the commonalities that allow for cooperative approaches might bring opportunity to act together for the women in the Middle East and North Africa region to improve women's rights. And I would like to conclude my presentation with some words of one of the participants of the Broader Middle East and North Africa Initiative Summit Conference. There is no peace without justice. There is no freedom without women. The women's rights issue is also totally related to full implementation of democracy, because there cannot be democracy without women, since democratization involves a mixture of participation of everyone without any discrimination, as the women's movements represent a central force from which democracy can be cherished, supported, and encouraged. Thank you.
Thank you, Aylin. And now we move on to our last presenter. Okay, so our last presenter today of this very interesting panel is Michal Allon from Tel Aviv University. The title of the presentation is The Paradoxical Status of Women in Israel. Thank you, Michal, and when she's ready we will start. Yeah.
Okay. It's a pleasure to be here. Just like to tell you that last night in my hotel I timed myself. It took me 30 minutes and I'm told that I have half of that, so I will try to improvise and skip less important things. I'm going to talk about my neck of the woods in the Middle East. And I would like to talk today about the phenomenon of the exclusion of women from the public sphere in Israel. I will describe some of the sources and causes of this phenomenon, the impact it has on Israeli society, and the difficulty in confronting it. The status of women in Israel is paradoxical. On the one hand, there have been impressive gains in the advancement of women in many domains. On the other hand, there have recently been serious setbacks in the status of women. These setbacks are due to an accelerated process of radicalization of Orthodox Jewish fundamentalism among some religious communities and their political leaders. A word of clarification. Throughout the talk, I will use the term religious and Orthodox interchangeably to refer to the ultra-Orthodox Jewish sector, which is sometimes referred to in Israeli Hebrew as Haredim. This is an oversimplification of a very complex variety of religious sects and levels of religiosity. Furthermore, the terminology and the classifications which are used in communities outside of Israel are often different. For example, in the United States, they're often referred to as Hasidic. The literature on gender inequity and discrimination against women in various societies and cultures is abundant. Much of the discussion is conducted within the framework of a theory of multiculturalism. Will Kimlicka, Susan Okin, and Ayelet Shachar, to name a few, have written about the challenges which multiculturalism poses for modern states. The challenges are ethical, cultural, and legal. However, I will claim that in the case of Israel, a theory of multiculturalism does not capture the complexity and ramifications of gender inequity. This is my plan. I will start by reviewing the advances made by women in the State of Israel. I will briefly describe the complex relationships between state and religion. I will then describe the relatively recent regression, which is the focus of this talk. I will examine the applicability of the multicultural model to the Israeli phenomenon in question, and finally, I will suggest an alternative framework of discourse which relies on concepts drawn from the literature of environmental ethics. I will argue that this approach better accounts for the Israeli phenomenon of gender exclusion, and it thereby allows for a more tractable ethical perspective on the matter. Israel belongs to the exclusive club of countries where a woman was the head of government as early as over 40 years ago. You may recognize Golda Meir. In politics, business, academia, and the military, women have made considerable progress in assessing their participation in more and higher positions. In January of 2013, general elections in Israel, 4 center-left opposition parties were headed by women. The number of women in the Israeli parliament is the highest since the establishment of the state. The former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was a woman. There are currently 4 female justices, including the Deputy Chief Justice. The CEOs of many major companies and banks are women. There are female presidents of universities. In 2009, an Israeli female scientist, Professor Ada Yonat, won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. Needless to say, women in Israel face the same barriers as in other countries. Some of the numbers cited above demonstrate this. Indeed, there are 2 women who are presidents of major universities in Israel, but only 2 out of 8 university presidents. There are now 27 female parliament members out of 120, more than ever before, but they comprise only 22% of the assembly members. And of course, women in Israel are no strangers to the glass ceiling. Arab women, and especially Bedouin women, endure additional hardships, and as you heard in the previous talks, like honor-killing, forced marriages, female genital mutilation, and so forth. These are beyond the scope of this talk. Established religion is an integral part of the government in Israel, and religion plays a central role in its politics. Religious parties invariably take part in the coalition which forms the government. They're very influential in determining the political and public agenda. There is no separation of religion and state. The state sees it as its duty to provide free religious services to its citizens. The major religions are subsidized by the government, and the clergy, priests, imams, rabbis, are all on the payroll of the state. Moreover, from its inception, the State of Israel surrendered its role in the area of marriage and divorce to the respective religious sects. There is a parallel and separate judiciary system for religious and family matters. Each religion has its own courts. The all-male judges in these courts rule according to respective religious law, the halakha, sharia, etc. As a result, 64 years after the establishment of Israel, there's no civil marriage or divorce. Intermarriage between people of different religions is impossible inside Israel. It is even the case that some people are prevented from marrying a person of their choice altogether due to religious restrictions. Since the offices of the various religious establishments are male-dominated, religious and secular women suffer discrimination and humiliation when they are in need of the services of these institutions. And needless to say, women cannot serve as judges in the religious courts which have jurisdictions over them. It should also be noted that most of the religious political parties officially exclude female candidates and female parliament members. Now, all religions, like all male-dominated institutions, discriminate against women in some form or another. Some argue that gender discrimination is not sanctioned by the true religion and stems from a misinterpretation of its scripture. Be that as it may, when there is no constitutional separation between state and church, the dictates of religion are forced upon those who do not wish to conform to them. Traditionally, Jewish men and women pray separately. This is true of synagogues of the Orthodox Judaism, which is the only stream which is officially recognized by the State of Israel. Hence, in Orthodox synagogues, there is a separate and very often inferior section for women. This section is usually in the gallery of the synagogue and is separated from the men's section by a partition or a curtain. Gender separation is not restricted to places of worship. Many gatherings and ceremonies in the Orthodox community are gender segregated. This is a picture of a gender segregated Orthodox wedding, and the curtain separates men from the women. For reasons of modesty, observant Jews avoid exposing their bodies in mixed company. In order to cater to them, there are several beaches and swimming pools which keep separate times for men and for women in order to enable gender-separated bathing. This is a fence in the Tel Aviv beach separating the public beach from the segregated beach. And this is the sign at the entrance of the religious beach. Women bathe on odd days and men on even days. There's an ongoing battle about the extent of these provisions. Orthodox Jews continue to demand for more and more gender-segregated beaches, and on the other hand, there are pressures from the general secular public and civil rights groups to limit these provisions because they restrict access to the general public, of the general public to national and public resources. The extent and the manifestations of the requirements of modesty are open to interpretation and debate. They're often understood as a requirement to avoid any physical contact between a man and a woman who are not married. The above-mentioned customs have been undergoing a gradual process of radicalization within the Orthodox Jewish community, but as long as they remain restricted to the community, they have met with relative tolerance from the rest of society. Religious leaders are constantly dictating new limitations, more stringent prohibitions, and increasingly modest dress codes, especially for women and even young girls. The rules of modesty and separation of the sexes are gradually interpreted as a prohibition of looking at women who are not modestly dressed. Increasingly, it becomes a restriction of looking at women in general, and in its extreme form, it has become a prohibition on looking at photos, pictures, images, and even garments and artifacts of women. The religious press subjects itself to limitations of modesty and strict rules of conduct, which are monitored by religious leaders of the respective communities. These are some examples of this so-called voluntary censorship. This is the mayor of a religious town and his family last winter. The publisher was called in to a religious tribunal and was severely reprimanded for printing this picture. Can anybody guess why? Well, if you look carefully, you can see the face of a woman. She happens to be the mayor's wife, and publishing a picture of a woman is strictly forbidden. This is a photograph from the hearings of a governmental investigative committee, and this is how it appeared in the religious press. The female member, of course, she was blotted out. Such photo manipulations are similar to the practice which was common under certain totalitarian regimes. And the consequences stretch above and beyond the issue of modesty. The deletion of women from pictures, in fact, erases their existence from the record. The rationales for these practices are modesty of women and avoiding sexual stimulation of men, in men. It should be noted, however, that not all Orthodox people accept all of these restrictions willingly. There are those within the Orthodox community who try to challenge some of the dictates of extreme modesty. The focus of this talk, however, is the slippage of this form of fundamentalism into the general public sphere in Israel. The custom of segregation of the sexes has taken an alarming turn and has been gradually exceeding its traditional and historical boundaries. The exclusion has not only become more and more extreme, but it has transcended religious communities and neighborhoods and has infiltrated the streets, the means of transportation, the public venues, which are frequented by the general public. Religious extremism is strengthening its hold in the public sphere and affects religious and secular people alike. This form of fundamentalism manifests itself in several ways. One is gender segregation, the other is the effacement of women's images from the public sphere, and the third is the repression of their voice. I will try to skip a little to get to the important part. Okay, this is a picture of the Wailing Wall, which is segregated. Here you can see segregated sidewalks in Jerusalem. Wow. This is another sign from Jerusalem. I circled the important parts. This is a market that used to be open to both genders, and now it's for men only. Needless to say, although these phenomena are mainly seen in predominantly religious neighborhoods, streets and sidewalks are public spaces which should be open to everybody. And this restriction of access is not sanctioned by Israeli law. The separation of men and women has infiltrated public transportation. In 1997, the National Bus Company started operating 2 bus lines, which were used by observant Orthodox Jews in 2 predominantly Orthodox population. This is a picture of the women board in the rear and sit in the rear. This is an innovation. There's a shower curtain. The practice, I've deleted some really funny pictures. We don't have everything. They even delete women's shoes from pictures. The practice has since expanded, and currently there are dozens of segregated bus lines, including intercity lines and lines which serve a diverse population. I'm skipping here. Okay, this is about the effacement of women's images. This is the second form of exclusion. There's been an ongoing and increasing pressure from extremists to remove the images of women from billboards, buses, commercials, official publications, catalogs, etc. This is another one. Here you can actually see them in action, ripping pictures of women from buses. Following a few incidents of vandalism, the bus company has decided not to display women's pictures on its buses. The decision of the bus company was challenged in the court. It was declared illegal. The bus company then decided not to display pictures at all because they fear vandalism. Okay, here we have two billboards. This one is for the general public, this one is for a religious community, you see? This one is from the internet site of the largest HMO in Israel. The ad claims that this HMO is the best for the family. Now, Israel is not the only country where women are excluded from the public sphere. In 2012, the IKEA catalog designated for distribution in Saudi Arabia was published in a special edition which did not contain the pictures of women. You see, you have the exact same page, but find the differences. Mommy is missing. The dictated prohibition of women's images has become evidently more than a merely aesthetic or commercial issue when women who ran for office were not allowed to post their pictures as part of the political campaign, while men's pictures were posted. These are two candidates. They're actually both moderately religious, and they're running for office in a moderately religious town, and see what happens. The rules of modesty also affect the art. Religious figures have interfered in the form and content of artistic performances in official ceremonies by dictating the dress, the music, and the participants in the performance. This is a group of young dancers who were scheduled to perform in an official ceremony. It was the inauguration of a Calatrava bridge in Jerusalem, and they were only allowed to perform like this. You see how happy they are. Official ceremonies and festivities which used to include performances by female singers and dancers have been censored and altered. In addition to the restriction made of public images, the Orthodox rules of modesty also prohibit men from even listening to women's voices. The original religious decree is to refrain from listening to erotic or seductive singing. It's a recent radical interpretation of this decree which extends the prohibition to women's voices in general. Here we have a group of female soldiers who are now, in many cases, prevented from appearing before soldiers. Advocates of cultural diversity and multiculturalism defend the rights of minority groups to maintain their culture and their customs, even in cases where the majority of the society within which they live find these customs objectionable and indeed illegal. Others, and notable among them is Susan Okin, claim that multiculturalism and the tolerance in which the liberal society treats its minorities very often comes at the expense of the most vulnerable members of the minority group. In this case, the multicultural approach is problematic. Firstly, since the community in question is a conservative patriarchal community, its values, norms, and regulations do not reflect women's interests and wishes. Another debated issue is whether the apparent consent of oppressed individuals within the minority can be understood to be genuine, free, and informed consent. Okay, I will skip. The problem is that the women are brought up in an illiberal society, and another complication is that even the Orthodox society is a heterogeneous society. Okay. The term, therefore, what I'm saying is that the multicultural, the question is no longer the extent of freedom granted to a minority to practice illiberal rituals in the private sphere, but rather this minority's demand to impose illiberal standards and norms on the public sphere of a liberal society. The term commons was historically used to refer to land and other natural resources which are collectively owned by society. In 1968, in his seminal and controversial paper, The Tragedy of the Commons, biologist Garrett Hardin revived the term as a metaphor for the public sphere. In this paper, he refers to the pollution of the commons not only with chemical pollutants, but also with noise, advertising, and other disturbances to mental health and to pleasure. In contemporary debate over intellectual property, the term commons is often used to refer to more abstract resources, such as technological and digital information, creative resources such as open source technologies, and online educational resources such as Wikipedia. The term enclosure has been used to refer to the process of enclosing and privatizing land. In current environmental discourse, these terms are widely used to describe the privatization, marketing, and abuse of natural resources. In 1994, George Monbiot coined the phrase the tragedy of the enclosure to describe the damage done by enclosure to the commons. I would like to adopt this terminology for the discussion of the phenomenon which I have described here, and to suggest that it captures the debate surrounding it as well as the ethical ramifications of its propagation. The commons is the public sphere, which belongs to everyone and to nobody in particular. The conceptual counterpart of the commons is the enclosure. The exclusion of women from certain locations constitute an enclosure of space which should be open to everybody. Just as parks, beaches, clean air are commons, so are the equal right to be heard and seen. Each of the manifestations of the exclusion of women I have described here can be viewed as cases of enclosure. Gender segregation is in effect an enclosure of the public sphere. The effacement of women and their image and the suppression of their voice rob women of access to the commons. As a result, the right to be active members of society is limited. Hence, when women are prevented from running from office, from effectively utilizing all the means of campaigning, persuasion, and so forth, they are robbed of access to the political commons. Likewise, when women artists are discriminatorily prevented from performing in public, they are denied access to the artistic commons. Gender segregation is an injurious enclosure of the commons in many other ways, some rather subtle. Every time a gender-segregated health clinic opens, a segregated bus line starts opening, a parallel service, which is not gender-segregated, has to be available to the public, which doesn't want to be such segregated. This extravagance results in redundancy, overspending, and excessive exploitation of resources. We seem to be sliding a slippery slope. Bollier 2002 calls for the reclaiming of the commons. In the case of the exclusion of women from the public sphere, this means banning all forms of gender segregation, prohibition of effacement and the repression of their women, images and their voices. Now, a concluding remark. In this talk, I focused on the exclusion of women from the public sphere in the Jewish sector. I have shown that religious fundamentalism has a detrimental effect on the lives and status of women. It is at least partly due to the lack of separation between religion and the state that this form of fundamentalism is able to have such a strong effect. I believe that the separation of religion and state will have a beneficial effect not only for Jewish women, but throughout the state of Israel, and will improve the lives of women of all faiths and all ethnic groups. If universal values of equality, the right to dignity, equal representation, and to equal protection of the law are important to Israeli society, it must take measures to reclaim the commons.
Can I ask a quick question? What percentage of fundamentalists are dictating policy in the country?
There are estimated about 15%, but going strong Orthodox families have something like 12 children each, and
So they're growing.
they're growing. I think that almost the majority of children who started school this year are going to be Orthodox, yes.
Yeah, following up on that, so if you have, let's say, 1,000 buses going, how many buses would be segregated, or 1,000 streets in
Well,
Jerusalem?
it has been ruled out that it's illegal. So what happens is women board these buses, they no longer put these, notes that this is segregated. They call it mehadrin, which means extra kosher, extra pious. It's no longer illegal, but if a woman boards this bus, she's harassed, bullied, told to be, it's unpleasant, but it's of course not official, it's illegal.
You wouldn't walk through Jerusalem constantly on segregated streets.
No, but in religious communities, and some of them border on, and these are public streets, they're funded by my tax monies. It's becoming worse.
So now can I ask a more general question? So you're saying this is what's happening in Israel. We're seeing this happening among Muslim communities. We're seeing it happening among Hindu communities. We're seeing this happening among Christian communities. Can we conjecture why there is this rise in religious fundamentalism without drawing distinctions between the various religions?
I have no idea.
I think that's a really interesting subject to study.
Well, it's a historical question. I think.
Which Christian one did you
Yeah, I think that it's not so true for Christians, but I think that historically religion was always on the rise in times of crisis. So maybe we're living in a time of crisis. I'm not a historian.
There are a couple of questions over there. Yes.
Oh, if I may. Have you done any research, or are you aware of any research among the Orthodox women themselves? I know with Christian fundamentalism, there's a very tiny emerging sort of feminist street coming about. Is there any backlash among Orthodox women?
Yes, and first of all, the three major streams of the Jewish religion, of them, and the smallest of them is the only one which is recognized officially by the State of Israel. So the Reform movement and the Conservative movement are not even recognized. That is, their rabbis are not recognized, they cannot perform marriages and divorce, they're really discriminated against. And I think that American Jewry is going to rebel, or is beginning to rebel. There have been attempts by women, there's a group of women of the Reform movement that's called Women of the Wall.